All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into some seriously mind-bending territory. The idea that our bodies are being turned into, like, living wires for transmitting data.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like something straight out of science fiction, but it's becoming more and more real every day. And that raises some big questions like, how is all this tech changing our relationship with our own bodies?
Exactly. And to explore this, we're looking at a series of videos from Sabrina Wallace. She calls herself an expert in technology and bioengineering.
She really gets into the weeds, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah. She goes deep, deep, like into biosensors and body area networks, and this whole future she sees where tech is basically woven into our biology.
And what's interesting is she doesn't shy away from the potential downsides. You know, she's really asking us to think about, like, control and consent, you know, like who's really in charge of all this.
Right. So our mission today is to try to unpack Sabrina's claims, cut through all the jargon, and really explore this question. Are we, like, on the verge of being plugged into some massive tech network without even realizing it?
I mean, it's a wild thought, but let's see where the evidence leads. Where do you want to start?
Well, Sabrina starts off talking about this thing called the Human Biofield, which, you know, a lot of people associate with spirituality and alternative medicine.
Yeah, that new agey stuff.
But she's saying it's now like a legitimate area of scientific study. And even more importantly, a target for manipulation by technology.
And what really struck me is even the IE, you know, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers.
The people who set all the tech standards.
Yeah, they have a whole working group now dedicated to the human biofield. So it's not just a bunch of mystics talking about this anymore. It's engineers, scientists, the big players in the tech world.
Okay, so that's interesting, but how does it actually work? Sabrina mentions this term, galvanic coupling.
Yeah, that's basically the idea that you can use low-frequency voltages and currents to turn the human body into a conductor.
So it's like we're the wires.
Yeah, kind of creepy, right? But it's the basis for all these body area networks, or bands.
Bands.
Yeah, basically imagine a network of sensors, but instead of using radio waves or something, they communicate using your body itself as the transmission medium.
Whoa. Okay, that's definitely sci-fi territory. But she says this research has been going on for decades, like back to 1996.
Yeah, and that's way before smartwatches and all that, so the idea of using the human body as part of a network has been around for a while.
Okay, so that's kind of creepy, but it gets even weirder. She says wearables are just the tip of the iceberg. We're moving toward this world of ambient sensing, where they can collect data about our bodies without even touching us.
So, like, you know, motion detectors or infrared sensors, even the camera on your laptop.
Yeah, and she mentions research on this thing called visible light communication, where they use, like, the flickering of LED lights to transmit data. So even the lights in our homes could be spying on us.
Which means, you know, the potential for data collection is huge, and it's often invisible. So it really makes you think about privacy, right? Like, where do we draw the line?
Right, and this is where things get really dark. Sabrina is clearly worried about manipulation and control. She's saying this isn't just about monitoring anymore. It's about influencing our biology.
Yeah, like this thing she calls wireless drugging. Apparently, they're researching ways to deliver drugs to specific parts of the body wirelessly.
Okay, that's just straight out of a spy movie. But the fact that they're even looking into this is pretty scary, right?
Yeah, it raises some big ethical questions, right? Like, who decides what goes into our bodies? What if someone misuses this technology?
Right, and she's saying our brains and bodies are becoming more vulnerable to external influence. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. It's like, what does it even mean to have a body in this world where technology is becoming so intertwined with us?
Okay, so now we're getting into some of the more out there stuff. She starts talking about CERN.
CERN! The particle physics lab in Switzerland.
Yeah, CERN. But she's not just talking about particle physics. She's saying they're also involved with digital twins.
Digital twins? You mean like a virtual copy of a person?
Yeah. And she's suggesting that these digital twins could be used to, like, model and manipulate our biology on a massive scale.
Okay, now I gotta admit, that sounds a little far-fetched. Is there any evidence for that? Like, isn't CERN mostly focused on physics, not biology?
Right, that's what I was thinking. It seems like maybe she's misinterpreting things or maybe exaggerating a bit.
Yeah, it's always good to be skeptical, especially with claims like that. But the concept of a digital twin itself is still pretty interesting, right? Like, imagine a virtual model of your body that doctors could use to predict health problems or personalized treatment.
That's both amazing and kind of scary. It raises questions about like privacy and who owns that data, right?
It's absolutely. And it also makes you think about, like, what if this technology gets used for things other than healthcare, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what if it's used for surveillance or marketing?
Okay, so moving on, Sabrina also talks about this thing called global brain connectomes. It's basically a worldwide effort to map the human brain, like in super detail.
Yeah, they're trying to create this map of all the connections in the brain, right? It's
Well,
called a connectome.
right, and the goal is to understand how the brain works, which could lead to, cures for brain diseases and maybe even ways to enhance our thinking.
But Sabrina seems to think that this knowledge could be used for more than just understanding, right? Like, what if it's used to influence or control our thoughts?
Yeah, she brings that up. It's a pretty scary thought. Like, if someone could hack into your brain, what does that even mean for free will?
It's a huge question. It makes you think about the future of privacy. Like, what does it even mean to be human when technology can mess with our minds?
And throughout her videos, Sabrina keeps coming back to this idea of transparency and consent. She's worried that all this is happening without the public really knowing or agreeing to it.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Like, if these technologies are going to have such a huge impact on our lives, shouldn't we at least have a say in how they're developed and used?
Exactly. It's not about being anti-technology. It's about, like, demanding some transparency, some accountability.
Right. It's about making sure that this technology actually benefits humanity, not just, a select few.
Sabrina also talks about the potential for, like, governments or corporations to use these bio-integrated technologies to control people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think those fears are realistic?
I mean, it's definitely a possibility, right? We've seen throughout history how technologies that were initially developed for good can be, repurposed for bad. And the ability to collect and analyze biological data on a massive scale, it definitely raises some ethical red flags,
She uses this term biosurveillance.
Yeah.
Like our bodies themselves could become part of some giant surveillance network.
Yeah, it's a pretty chilling thought. Imagine a world where, every heartbeat, every breath, even your emotions are being tracked and recorded.
Right. She points to specific examples like they're already using sensors to track people's movements and even their emotions.
And she even mentions these things called electroceuticals, which sound like something straight out of a cyberpunk novel.
Electro what?
Electroceuticals. They're like using electrical stimulation to change how your nervous system works.
Like to treat diseases?
Yeah. Right now, they're mostly being researched for things like chronic pain and depression. But Sabrina is asking, like, what if they could be used to control our thoughts or emotions? Or even our behavior.
So it's like our bodies are becoming both the target and the tool of this whole tech revolution.
That's a good way to put it. We're in this weird in-between space now where the lines between our physical selves and the digital world are getting blurry. And as those lines get blurry, the potential for misuse, it just keeps growing.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Like, what can we do to protect ourselves from the potential downsides of all this?
Well, I think awareness is key, right? The more people know about this technology, the more likely we are to, demand ethical guidelines and regulations.
So it's about educating ourselves and each other.
Exactly. We need to be having open and honest conversations about the kind of future we want to build. We need to make sure technology serves us, not the other way around.
Well said. And on that note, we'll take a break and come back to explore even more of Sabrina's claims in part 2.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Buckle up.
Yeah, and this idea of molecular communication, that sounds, almost like Star Trek, right? Like, what even is that?
Yeah, so molecular communication, it's this crazy idea of using molecules to transmit information, almost like a biological Wi-Fi.
Whoa, okay. And she says that could be used to, like, manipulate our bodies on a cellular level, even our DNA. Is that even possible?
Well, it's definitely still early days for that kind of technology, and the ethical implications are huge. I mean, manipulating our bodies at the cellular level, that's not something to be taken lightly.
For sure, but it's part of this bigger trend we're seeing, right? This merging of technology with our biology. And as that happens, we're going to have to face a whole new set of ethical challenges.
Okay, so let's get back to this wireless drugging idea. She claims they could actually deliver drugs to specific places in your body wirelessly. Is there any, like, scientific basis for that?
Well, the idea of wireless drug delivery, it's not completely out there. There's actual research going on in targeted drug delivery and nanomedicine, using tiny particles to deliver drugs to specific parts of the body.
So it's not totally science fiction.
Right. But the kind of wireless drugging Sabrina is talking about, where like someone could manipulate you without your knowledge or consent, that's still a long way off, if it's even possible.
Okay, so more of a theoretical possibility at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But it does show this trend, right? This growing integration of technology with our bodies. And as that happens, we're going to need to think about the ethics of it all.
She keeps bringing up CERN. And this time, it's in the context of biomedicine. She claims they're doing biomedical research there, maybe even, like, housing digital twins for that kind of research. Do we know anything about CERN's involvement in biomedicine?
They do have a little bit of involvement in biomedical research. Like, they've developed some technologies for cancer treatment using proton beams and stuff.
So maybe she's just exaggerating their role in all this.
Yeah, it's possible. And it's a good reminder, right, that we should always be careful about, the information we come across, especially online. It's important to double-check things, find reliable sources.
Sabrina seems pretty convinced that there's a real potential for these technologies to be used for, like, bad stuff, like to control people. She uses the term biosurveillance, like our bodies are becoming part of some massive surveillance system.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. When you think about the amount of data that can be collected and analyzed from our bodies, it does raise questions about privacy and potential misuse.
Right. And she points to those examples we talked about before, like using sensors to track people's movements, even their emotions.
The emotion tracking thing, that's especially unsettling, right? Like, imagine if algorithms could predict and manipulate our behavior based on how we're feeling.
That sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
But the technology is there, right? So the question is it actually being used that way? It's hard to say for sure, but it's something we need to keep an eye on.
Okay, so what can we do about all this? Like, how can we protect ourselves?
Well, awareness is the first step, right? The more people know about this stuff, the more likely we are to demand, ethical guidelines, regulations, that kind of thing.
So educating ourselves, educating others.
Exactly. And also, thinking about legal protections. Are the current laws strong enough to protect our privacy in this new world of bio-integrated technology? Probably not.
So we need to, push for stronger laws.
I think so, yeah. We need to make sure our rights are protected, even as technology keeps advancing.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Sabrina spends a lot of time talking about CERN, and she claims they're involved in this, nefarious plot involving digital twins and manipulating human biology. What do you make of that?
Well, it's important to be skeptical of these kinds of claims, especially when they come from, sources that might not be completely reliable. CERN is a respected research institution, but their main focus is physics, not bioengineering or anything like that.
So it sounds like maybe she's reading too much into things.
Yeah, it's possible. It's always good to double check things, do your own research, find reliable sources, that kind of thing.
Right. She also talks about this thing called smart dust, which sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, smart dust. It's basically these tiny, tiny sensors, like microscopic.
And what could they be used for?
Well, they could be used for all sorts of things, right? Like environmental monitoring, tracking the weather, that kind of thing. But Sabrina is worried that they could also be used for biosurveillance.
Like to spy on people.
Yeah, basically. Imagine these tiny sensors everywhere, tracking your movements, monitoring your health, even collecting DNA samples.
Okay, that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, it is. And it raises all sorts of questions about privacy, right? Like, who's collecting this data? What are they doing with it? Do you have any control over it?
She even suggests that smart dust could be used to, deliver drugs or other substances to people without their knowledge.
Yeah, she does. And that's a pretty frightening thought, right? Like, imagine if someone could use these things to, target you with drugs or toxins without you even knowing it.
That's straight out of a sci-fi horror movie.
It is. And it just highlights the need to think about the ethics of all this, right? We can't just let technology run wild. We need to have conversations about how to use it responsibly, ethically.
And Sabrina even claims to be a modified child, She says she's part of this Bayor bloodline and that she was experimented on by the Menninger Foundation. Any idea what she's talking about?
It's It's really hard to say. I mean, those claims are pretty out there, and it's hard to find any reliable information to back them up. The Menninger Foundation, they were a psychiatric research center, but there's no evidence that they were doing anything like genetic modification or experiments on kids.
So maybe she's just, trying to make herself seem more credible, more like an expert on all this.
Yeah, it's possible. It's always a good idea to be cautious when someone makes extraordinary claims, especially when there's no evidence to support them.
She also mentions this Project Salus. She says her parents were involved with it back in 1969. Any idea what that might be?
I haven't been able to find anything about a project with that name, especially not one related to, genetic modification or anything like that. It's possible she's referring to something that was, top secret, but without more information, it's hard to say.
So another one of those claims that we should probably take with a grain of salt.
Exactly. It's always good to be skeptical, to do your own research, and not just take someone's word for it, no matter how convincing they might sound.
All right, let's move on to another one of Sabrina's claims. She talks about these things called directed energy weapons, and she says they can be used to target people with electromagnetic radiation, causing all kinds of harmful effects.
Yeah, directed energy weapons, or DUWs. They're basically weapons that use concentrated electromagnetic energy to, damage or disable targets. There are different types like lasers, microwaves, and particle beams, and they have been developed for military use.
So they're real.
Yeah, they're real. But the question is, are they being used against individuals? Sabrina seems to think so, and she claims they can cause all sorts of problems, from pain and disorientation to, serious health issues.
Is there any, scientific evidence to support those claims? Can electromagnetic radiation really do that kind of damage?
Well, it depends on the frequency and the intensity of the radiation, right?
Yeah.
Low levels of electromagnetic radiation, like the kind we're exposed to every day from our phones and Wi-Fi, that's generally considered safe. But high levels, that can be dangerous. It can cause burns, tissue damage, that kind of thing. And there's some evidence that certain frequencies can mess with brain activity and cause neurological symptoms.
So it's not just about physical harm, but potential brain damage too.
Yeah, exactly. And the possibility of these weapons being used against people without their knowledge or consent, that's a huge ethical concern.
She also mentions these things called psychotronic weapons, which she says are a type of DEW that can control people's minds, make them think or feel certain things.
Yes, psychotronic weapons. That's where we get into the realm of conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. There's no credible scientific evidence to suggest that you can use electromagnetic radiation to, directly control someone's thoughts or emotions.
So that's probably just, misinformation or speculation.
Yeah, most likely. It's important to be able to distinguish between, real science and stuff that's just made up or based on flimsy evidence.
She also talks about synthetic telepathy, like technology that could transmit thoughts directly into people's minds. Is there any truth to that?
Well, the idea of synthetic telepathy, it's still pretty much science fiction. Scientists are working on brain-computer interfaces where, you can control a computer with your thoughts, but actually transmitting thoughts from one mind to another, that's still a long way off.
So another one of those claims that sounds cool but isn't really backed up by science?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of hype around these kinds of technologies, and it's easy to get caught up in it. But it's important to be realistic about what's actually possible.
Sabrina also mentions this thing called voice-to-skull technology, which she describes as a way to, beam voices or sounds directly into someone's head, without them hearing it through their ears.
Yeah, that's another one that falls into the realm of, conspiracy theories and speculation. There's no scientific basis for that kind of technology.
So more science fiction than science fact.
Exactly. While, there might be some theoretical possibilities, the claims about voice-to-skull technology are way beyond what's currently understood or possible.
Okay, so we need to be careful about, believing everything we hear, especially when it comes to these advanced technologies.
Absolutely. It's easy to get swept up in the hype or the fear, but it's important to be critical, to ask questions, and to look for evidence.
All right, let's move on to another claim that Sabrina makes. She talks about remote neural monitoring, which sounds pretty scary. She says it's the ability to, monitor and record someone's brain activity from a distance.
Yeah, that's another one that's not supported by mainstream science. While we can measure brain activity using things like EEG, that requires, putting electrodes on someone's head, there's no way to do it remotely with any kind of accuracy or detail.
So those claims are probably just, conspiracy theories.
Yeah, that's more likely. It's important to be aware of the difference between scientific research and stuff that's just made up or based on misunderstandings.
She also seems to be suggesting that all these technologies are part of some bigger plan, some agenda to control people, you know? She talks about a transhumanist agenda to merge humans with technology, create a new kind of being.
Transhumanism is a real thing, right? It's this idea that we can use technology to, enhance human capabilities, overcome our limitations, and there are definitely some ethical concerns about that. Like, what if it creates a divide between, enhanced humans and regular humans?
Right. But is there really a hidden agenda to control people, like Sabrina suggests?
It's hard to say. I mean, there are definitely some powerful forces at play, governments, corporations, and they're all interested in these technologies. But to say that there's a coordinated plan to control humanity, that's a pretty big leap.
Okay, so we need to be cautious about, attributing malicious intent to every research project in this field.
Exactly. It's good to be aware of the potential for misuse, but we shouldn't jump to conclusions.
All right, let's talk about another one of Sabrina's more out there claims. She says that CERN is doing research on interdimensional travel, like trying to open portals to other dimensions.
Okay, that's definitely getting into the realm of science fiction. CERN is a physics lab, and they do some amazing research, but interdimensional travel, that's not something they're working on.
So she's probably just, misinterpreting their work.
Yeah, most likely. It's easy to get things mixed up, especially when you're dealing with complex scientific concepts.
Right. She also mentions these things called scalar waves, which she says are a type of electromagnetic wave that can be used for all sorts of things like communication, energy transfer, even weapons. Have you ever heard of scalar waves?
Not in any legitimate scientific context. The term scalar wave is sometimes used in, fringe science or pseudoscience, but it's not a recognized concept in mainstream physics.
So probably just another one of those things that sounds cool but isn't real.
Yeah, probably. It's always good to double check things, Look for evidence, see if there's any real science behind the claims.
She brings up this idea of the quantum vacuum, and she says it's somehow connected to these biointegrated technologies. Can you explain what the quantum vacuum is?
So the quantum vacuum, it's this concept in quantum physics, and it's basically the lowest energy state of a quantum field. It's not empty space, but rather a sea of virtual particles that pop in and out of existence.
Okay, that's pretty hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah, it's definitely some mind-bending stuff, and some theories suggest that the quantum vacuum could be a source of energy or information that we could tap into with, advanced technology.
And Sabrina seems to think that these biointegrated technologies are somehow interacting with the quantum vacuum, maybe allowing for effects that we don't even understand yet.
Yeah, she does. But it's important to remember that those claims are very speculative and there's no real scientific evidence to support them. The quantum vacuum is a fascinating area of research, but its role in biointegrated technology is still, very much unknown.
Okay, so we should be careful about accepting those kinds of claims without some solid evidence.
Exactly. It's always good to be open to new ideas, but we also need to be skeptical, especially when dealing with, complex scientific concepts.
So bringing it back to the human biofield, even though it's still kind of a controversial concept, Sabrina suggests that it's a major target for those who want to, control and manipulate people using these biointegrated technologies. How could the biofield be manipulated, and what would be the consequences?
Well, Sabrina's claims about manipulating the biofield, they often go into, areas of speculation and they don't really have any solid scientific evidence to back them up. While some researchers are looking into using electromagnetic fields for, medical treatments, the idea that you can manipulate the biofield to control people's thoughts or behavior, that's still unfounded.
Okay, so another one of those claims that we should be wary of.
Yeah, I think so. It's always important to be critical and to look for evidence, especially when you're dealing with claims that have, big implications for individual freedom and autonomy.
It seems like Sabrina sees herself as a kind of like a whistleblower, warning people about the dangers of all this technology and the people behind it.
Yeah, she definitely presents herself that way. But it's important to remember that her claims are often mixed with personal stories, speculation, and references to ideas that aren't really accepted by mainstream science.
So we need to be careful about separating the real concerns from the speculation.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key, and it's important to evaluate the source of the information, especially when it comes to, extraordinary claims.
So Sabrina talks a lot about like manipulation and control. This idea that these technologies could be used to influence people without them even realizing it. What are some of the ways this could happen? Like, what are some of the more subtle forms of manipulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's easy to imagine the obvious forms of control, right? But the more insidious ones might be much more subtle. Like, imagine personalized advertising that's not just based on your browsing history, but on your actual emotions in real time, like sensors picking up on how you're feeling and tailoring ads to exploit that.
So like a super targeted ad campaign that plays on your fears or your desires.
Exactly. Or imagine social media platforms that subtly adjust the content you see based on your biofeedback, like trying to nudge you towards certain opinions or behaviors.
It's like the technology is learning about you and then using that information to manipulate you.
Yeah, it's like a feedback loop. And the scary thing is, you might not even realize it's happening. You might think you're making your own choices, but in reality, you're being influenced by these external forces.
That's pretty disturbing. Makes you wonder about, free will and all that. Like, if our bodies and minds are becoming more susceptible to these kinds of influences, what does that mean for our ability to make our own decisions?
That's a huge question, right? And it's something we need to be thinking about now before it's too late. We need to figure out how to, maintain our autonomy in this new world of bio-integrated technology.
Well, that's a lot to digest. We're going to take a break here and come back to wrap up this deep dive in part 3.
There's still so much to discuss, so make sure you come back for the final part.
Yeah, and it really makes you think, right? Like, are we really in control of our own data? Do we have the right to decide how it's used? These are like big questions we need to be asking ourselves as a society.
Absolutely. I mean, we've gone from the human biofield to smart dust to the quantum vacuum. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, and Sabrina, even though some of her claims are a bit, out there, she really makes us think about where all this technology is headed, for sure. So what are some key takeaways for our listeners? Like, what do we do with all this information?
Well, first of all, I think awareness is key, right? Like, this stuff is developing so fast. We got to stay informed about what's going on, what the potential benefits and risks are.
So no burying our heads in the sand.
Yeah, exactly. And second, we got to be critical thinkers, Don't just believe everything you hear. Do your research, check your sources, all that good stuff.
Good advice for life in general, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, I think we got to get involved, talk about these issues with friends, family, advocate for ethical guidelines, regulations, all that. Demand transparency from the people in power.
So it's not just about understanding the tech, it's about shaping how it's used.
Exactly. We have a choice in what kind of future we create.
Sabrina's message seems to be like a mix of warning and hope, right? She's cautioning us about the dangers, but she's also saying we have the power to make sure technology is used for good.
I think that's a really important point. It's not about, rejecting technology altogether. It's about making sure it aligns with our values, with our vision for humanity.
Well, this has been quite a journey. We've explored some really mind-bending concepts, and it's clear that this whole world of bio-integrated technology, it's full of potential, but also a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, for sure. And it's moving fast, so we need to stay informed and engaged.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and most importantly, keep thinking critically about the world around you. Until next time.